What are your thoughts on the year 2024? I know we're a week into it already, but I love New Year. Maybe I'm naive and not as cynical as I thought I was, but I love New Year. I love making New Year's resolutions. I love the idea of a fresh start. And whenever the new year rolls around, I get really excited because I like to think of the different changes that I'd like to make. I like to think of the different things I want to do differently over the next 12 months. And I just love the idea of a bit of a fresh start in the new year. And maybe some of you, maybe some of you share in that excitement. But I'm also aware that some of you might be less excited than I am about the new year. Maybe for some of you, making New Year's resolutions is the last thing you're going to do. It's pointless. It's a waste of time. You've been there before and you've been stung so many times. And maybe you think back to last year and you were really enthusiastic on the 1st of January. And then you got to this day last year, the 7th of January, and you were not just so sure. And then maybe by the end of this coming week, you were despairing because it felt like you were right back to square one all over again. Some of you maybe, you're not looking forward to this new year because you've been through a lot in 2023. You have been left feeling worn out and discouraged by the things you've had to face. Or maybe some of you, it's kind of a bit different. You're not looking forward to 2024 because there's a dark shadow that is hanging over the next 12 months. There's just something that really bothers you about the coming year. Maybe it's health concerns. And there are health concerns and they've been maybe slowly building over the last 12 months. And it just looks like they're maybe going to come to a head in the next 12 that's still to come. Maybe some of you have money worries. And things have been tight for the last year. And you know perfectly well that things are going to get even more tough with some of the bills that are on the horizon. Maybe some of you have got family problems. Or maybe you've got work problems. Or maybe there's someone you love, maybe a member of your family, maybe a friend who's very dear to you, and you're just really worried about what is going to happen with them over the next year. Maybe for some of you, you don't see a new year as the opportunity for a fresh start. You see it as something ominous, something frightening, something foreboding. What do you think of 2024? Well, I think it's fair to say that if there's a spectrum, you've got me at one end, really optimistic and excited about the next year, and someone who's just desperately fearing what's to come. I think it's fair to say that all of us are somewhere in that spectrum. But wherever you are this evening, we've got a verse here that is really, really appropriate as we look forward to the next 12 months. It's a reminder to those of us who've made New Year's resolutions. It's a reminder that we're not in this by ourselves. It's a reminder that we don't rely on our own grit or our own determination, but we can, as we've just been singing, rely with confidence on God. It's a challenge, maybe to those of you who haven't made New Year's resolutions, or any of us who have maybe made New Year's resolutions that aren't really the most important thing. And it's a challenge to us that whatever we decide to do in 2024, serving God has to be up here. It has to be our absolute top priority. This verse is a comfort as well. It's a comfort for anybody here who's burdened. Because the verse tells us, whatever the next year has in store for us, God is not going to simply sit back and watch. He's not going to sit in his hands and watch us while we struggle to keep our heads above water. He's going to intervene. Now, before we come to look at the particular verse we're looking at, I want to just say a little bit of something about the context of the verse. Paul here, what he's doing is he's asking the Christians in Corinth for money. Basically, he's told them that there are Christians in Jerusalem. These Christians are in a desperate financial situation. They desperately need financial support. And so Paul asks the Christians in Corinth to help out. He knows that they've given money before. He knows that they've given generously. But now he's asking them to give a little bit more. Nothing remarkable about that, but what is remarkable is that Paul shows in this passage that there is a deeper significance to the Corinthians giving. What he shows us is what you give, and just as significantly as what you give, how you give it, it says an awful lot about what you think of God. So, for example, if someone gives generously, well, then that probably suggests that that person believes in a generous God. If someone gives stingily, on the other hand, well, then that person probably believes in a God who holds back. If someone gives joyfully, that person probably believes in a God who delights in giving good things to his people. If someone gives begrudgingly, it's probably a sign that that person believes in a God who needs to have his arm twisted. So Paul here, he's talking about financial giving, and that's an important thing. It's not what we're thinking about this evening, but it is an important thing to consider. But what we are thinking about tonight is the wider principle that lies behind what Paul says about giving money. Because the wider principle is how we view God. What we think of God dictates how we serve God. If we see God as a miser, well then our service of God is going to be dreary, it's going to be joyless, and it's going to be grey. If we see God as someone who gives generously, well then our service for God is going to be full of joy. If we expect God to lavish blessing upon us, well then that's going to free us. It's going to liberate us. It's going to allow us to make big sacrifices in order to serve. But if we just can't imagine that sort of blessing coming from God, well then we're going to be crippled with fear, because we're always going to be worried that we're going to miss out. If we see God as Paul sees God, if we see him as kind-hearted, as a loving father who delights in giving gifts to his children, well then whatever you think of the year 2024, you'll be able to face it with hope and with confidence and with peace. Let's look at the verse. 2 Corinthians 9 verse 8. God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Just take a quick glance at the verse. Hopefully you can see there is a word that leaps right off the page. I hope you see it. It's the word all. 4 times it appears. God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. It's really 5 times if you factor in the word every. It's really, really striking the way this verse is written. Just an interesting thing for you. The original Greek that Paul wrote in, the word order is a little bit different, and you actually have the word all appears 3 times in a row. So that's really striking. Just all. Paul is very clearly telling us that God will give us all that we need. First thing that we see, God is able to make all grace abound to us. God is able to make all grace abound to us. Now, grace is a word that we use all the time in church, and the problem whenever you use a word all the time is sometimes you lose sight of what the word actually means. And so the question is, what is grace? And I think maybe the best way or the easiest way of understanding what grace means is to think about the difference between grace and mercy, because these are two words we often use together, but they're not exactly the same word. And so mercy is whenever God doesn't give us what we deserve. So we deserve to have punishment. We deserve to be judged, but God spares us. God shows us mercy. He doesn't give us what we deserve. But grace goes a step further than that. Grace is when God doesn't simply not give us what we do deserve. It's when He actually does give us what we don't deserve. So He gives us joy. He gives us hope. He gives us material things. He gives us all sorts of undeserved gifts. That's grace. It's God's goodness to us that we don't deserve in any way whatsoever. And Paul is telling us here, God is able to make all grace abound to us. I think that's brilliant. It's really, really sad that so many people, they see God as someone who takes. They see Him as someone whose sole purpose is to make demands. Don't do this. Don't do that. Go to church, be good, read your Bible, sing and pray. That's what God lives for. But Paul says to these Corinthians, you are free to give generously because God isn't someone who takes. God is someone who gives. He says to you and to me, you are free to make big sacrifices in this coming year. You are free to take big risks in serving God because God is more than capable of showering you with His richest blessings. Paul tells us God is not like a boss at work. He's not like a manager in the office. He's not someone who gives us a salary because of the work that we've done. No, He gives us grace. He gives to us out of His own good pleasure. It's tragic that so many people, so many religious people, that's how they see God. They see Him as a boss. And He's always watching. And He's always making sure that we make our quota. And He's always ready to dock our pay if we don't do enough. And He's more than happy to snatch away our Christmas bonus. And there's something exhausting about that because you're always having to keep up. And it's tiring. But not for Paul, because Paul doesn't see God as a boss. I mean, he's God's servant, of course, but he doesn't see God in that way. He sees God as a father. And fathers don't give Christmas bonuses that depend on the performance of their children. Fathers give Christmas presents because they delight in seeing smiles on their children's faces. So the question is, how do you see God? Is He a boss who takes? Or is He a father who gives? You see Him one way and it's draining. It's exhausting. You see Him the other way and it's refreshing and encouraging. God is able to give us all grace. And if you want proof of that, well, doesn't He show us in His giving of the Lord Jesus Christ, the most gracious gift of all, as He sent Him into this world to die in our place. God is able to give us all grace. But notice then we get two more alls after that. All things at all times. So God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things at all times. So I asked at the start, what do you think of 2024? Truth is, none of us actually are sure what the year is going to look like. Might be a hard year. Might be an easy year. Might be somewhere in between. New Year's Eve used to look really, really different for me and Ruth before the kids came along. Couldn't look more different now. But what we used to do every New Year's Eve is we would always meet up with the same group of friends, and we always went to exactly the same house, and you always did exactly the same things whenever you were there. But one of the things that we would do at one point during the night is we would make predictions about the year that was coming up, and everybody got a couple of pieces of paper and a pen, and you had to write down your prediction, and you folded it up, and then it went into a box. The lid was put in the box was stuck under a bed for the next year, and then the next New Year's Eve out would come the box, and we would read the predictions, and we'd have a great laugh at just how completely off the mark almost all of the predictions were. It really showed that we're not very good at predicting what's going to happen. Yet there is something we can say with 100% confidence about this coming year. Whatever circumstances we face, God is going to pour his abounding grace upon his people in Letterkenny. He guarantees it. All things at all times. Wonder what sort of times we're going to have this year. Times of laughter, times of mourning, times of relaxing, times of worry. Wonder how many weeks will some of us here spend anxiously waiting for doctor's results. Wonder how many hours might some of us here spend on a hard plastic chair at A&E. I wonder how many nights will some of us spend tossing and turning in bed because there's something that just keeps on going round and around in our heads. I wonder how many afternoons will some of us spend in floods of tears because of the way that someone's treated us or because of something someone said about us. I wonder how many long winter evenings will some of us spend and we're lonely. Maybe lonely in spite of the fact we're surrounded by people, but it just feels like no one understands. Well, Paul tells us God is able to make all grace abound to us in all times. Wonder what things are we going to face this year? Maybe some of you are looking ahead. I was going to say you're looking forward, but you're not looking forward, you're looking ahead with nervousness. Maybe you've got members of your family and they're belligerent and they're difficult. And you're just dreading what's going to come next. Maybe your bank balance has been going down and down and down, and there's bills on the horizon. Maybe there's politics at work. Maybe there's stress and exams and changes at school. Yet Paul tells us, in every moment of 2024, whether it's pleasant or painful, in everything you face, God is able to make all grace abound. It's great, isn't it? The grace to endure hospital appointments with joy. The grace to unpack boxes and look for that thing you just can't find without losing it completely. The grace to do exams at school or to meet new classmates at school. The grace to have your car break down or your car insurance go through the roof and not be driven to despair. Even the grace to lose a loved one and to be sustained by the help and the hope of the gospel. Whatever grace we need this year, for whatever thing we have to face this year, God lavishes it upon us. He gives us all grace in all things, at all times, so we can have all we need. You're going to think I'm obsessed with this, by the way, but a couple of months ago, whenever I was preaching on Mark's Gospel, I gave you an illustration about an all-you-can-eat buffet in Belfast, Cosmo in Victoria Square. Well worth going to if you're ever up that way. You get everything at Cosmo. Indian, Chinese, Italian. It's fantastic. You'll be fed up hearing me talking about it now, but you just fill your plate with whatever you want. And once you've cleared your plate, you just get up and you get another plate and you fill it up and you keep on going and going and going as many times as you want. And it doesn't matter how many times you go up, and it doesn't matter how much food you put in your plate, there is always more food to be had whenever you go up. And the great thing about this restaurant is that everybody pays the same price for their food. I don't know, maybe this says more about my upbringing than anything else, but there have been times that I have been out at the restaurant with friends, and maybe some of them haven't really, in my opinion, entered into the spirit of things. They've eaten a normal amount of food, and then you come to the end and you come to pay, and I think to myself, well, I think I got better value for money than that person did. Well, some people are going to have a more difficult 2024 than others. And if that's you, one thing you can say is that you're getting better value than anybody else. Because you're paying the same for your grace that the rest of us are paying. You're paying nothing at all. But you're getting more grace than the rest of us in one sense. You could say in one sense your plate is being heaped higher with the grace that God gives, because God gives us all that we need. Of course, we all need as much grace as we can get, but when there's particular grace that you need, you can be sure that God is going to give it to you. And you, for example, you maybe don't need the patience to bring up exhausting children who are always on. Some of us definitely do need the patience for that. And we can be sure that God's going to give us the grace to do that. I don't need the grace to do exams at school. And I don't need the grace to work a 9-to-5 job with a difficult boss. And I don't need the grace to get through the challenges of growing older. But if you need that grace, well, God is going to give you whatever you need. And so whatever your biggest challenge is in this coming year, whether it's physical or mental or emotional or a combination of them all, whether it's fighting a particular sin or growing in a particular grace or supporting a particular person, whatever grace you need, God will heap it on your plate. God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Here's the challenge now. Well, the first challenge, I think, is to believe it. Satan will try and tell us it's not true. But here's the next challenge. God's grace is not for stuffing under a mattress. And it's not for storing up for a rainy day. It's for using. And so the question that this passage asks us is, are we channels of God's grace? Or are we cul-de-sacs? Do we take God at his word? So for example, verse 6 of this chapter. Remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Do we believe that? Are we resolving that we're going to go out on a limb this year? Are we resolving that we're going to swim against the tide? Are we resolving that we're going to put God first before anything else in all of our lives? And as we make those resolutions, are we doing it with the expectancy that as we serve, God is going to pour out his blessing upon us? Do we have confidence that even if we have to maybe suffer embarrassment for doing the right thing, even if we have to be ill thought of by other people, even if we have to wrestle and strain against sin and against bad habits, even if serving God leads us to tears and sleepless nights, do we have the confidence it'll be worth it? Why? Because our God is a generous giver. That's something Paul knew. You think of everything Paul went through in the course of his life. And yet every step of the way, he experienced the richness of God's grace, didn't he? But not only did Paul know this from his own life, it's something he'd seen time and time again in the people of God. So for example, back one chapter, chapter 8, verse 2, we've got the example here of the Macedonians. Out of the most severe trial, what did they have? Overflowing joy. And there's the grace of God at work. Out of the most severe trial, overflowing joy. The grace of God to endure hardship and yet to have your hope and your joy completely undimmed. The grace to face poverty in whatever form that might take, and yet still to give generously to others. The grace, the all-sufficient grace for everything and every time we face. The grace that God promises to extend to you and to me over the course of the next year. How thankful we should be for this wonderful, incredible, all-sufficient grace of our Lord Jesus Christ.